Yo, man, what the heck are you doing here? Well, you're about to find out. So, my name's Yusuf, and you might be wondering what the heck's a yeoman? And why am I making videos here on the YouTubes? Well, I'm set out to solve the most complex problems of the world. And if you stick with me, I'll show you the ways that I think that we can turn the biggest issues of our day into opportunity. So first, what's a yeoman? Well, we got some definitions here. We could say basically someone who helps another person. It's also used as a term to someone who cultivates a small farm and someone who performs good service, as you read here. Um, Now, the yeoman's work, the yeoman's service, is known to be very good and very dependable, valuable, and it's hard work too. The idea behind a yeoman is someone who contributes to the greater good and does so with honesty and integrity and doesn't take the easy way out. And so, if in our history in the South, the yeoman farmer was seen as the embodiment of the ideal American for reasons I just mentioned. Um, Thomas Jefferson especially really praised the yeoman's spirit and their self-reliance, and it was through that piece of strength that they were able to start giving back to their community. Now, yeomans, they didn't abuse another person to make a living for themselves, right? Like they didn't have slaves, or if they did, very few. You have to remember the historical context. But so the family unit was the primary unit of sustenance, right? And so the yeoman's able to take care of their own needs. And you know, Jefferson really wanted to have more yeomans around. Um, and we had a lot of founding farmers. Washington, he didn't want to to take on that responsibility of leadership, but given the circumstances, he felt called to. The farm, it can be a very relaxing place, um, and say for me, uh, I sorry, just quick. Okay, so for me, I when I started going to college in 2011, I knew that I wanted to solve the most complex problems as it relates to our environment, and we're going to go into that a little bit. But eventually, I found farming, and for me, farming is a way to get at the symptoms and not just treat them, but think holistically, right? Because with farming, it's very cause and effect. Right? Like you can't fake it. If you don't have good weeding practices, weeds are going to grow. If you don't have a good fertility system, your crops are going to be stunted and they're going to be more weak and they're going to be more liable to pest pressure, right? And so all these difficulties, um, you know, and the virtue of the farm led Jefferson to say this. So I'll read this aloud. This is from his notes on Virginia. Those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God, if ever he had a chosen people, whose breasts he had made in his particular deposit for substantial and genuine virtue. It is the focus in which he keeps alive that sacred fire, which otherwise might escape from the face of the earth. Corruption of morals is in the mass of cultivators is a phenomena of which no age nor nation has furnished an example. Basically saying that no nation who is gone bad with agriculture is here to stand in the day. So sometimes this old speak can be kind of hard to comprehend. So I'm gonna try and decipher some of it. Let's get back into it. So again, corruption of morals in the mass of cultivators is a phenomenon of which no age nor nation has furnished an example. It is the mark set on those who, not looking up to heaven, to their own soil and industry, as does the husbandman for their subsistence, depend for it on casualties and caprice of their customers. Dependence begets subservience and venality, suffocates the germ of virtue, and prepares for tools, sorry, and prepares fit tools for the designs of ambition. So what does that mean? What was Jefferson trying to say here? Right? He really warned against being dependent on another person. Right? And when you are, say, if you get really specialized in, say, manufacturing, and you know how to put some simple components together, but you don't know how to sustain yourself from a basic point of view, like growing, basic building techniques, like the stuff that keeps us comfortable and alive, then you start to have to look to an external source for that validation, right? And when you start doing that, then you get vain, and it can be over consuming for you. And in his words, it suffocates the germ of virtue. We think of germs in this negative connotation, but in this context, the germ means something that spreads, right? And ideas, in a way, can be germs, but I like to think of them more as seeds. Okay, and Jefferson, he's known for his Monticello place, right? Um, a lot of times for the architecture and what have you. But for me, when I look at this, I see a pretty cool farm, pretty great farm actually. Um, and so if I highlight this, it might be a little clunky. It's the first time really trying to do this on the fly. Okay, right. Um, Here we go. Okay, so as I am looking at this farm, right, um, I have a background in agriculture, so I see a few things. A lot of the first thing that people might notice is this house, right, and that's a beautiful structure. Maybe we'll do another video one day. And yeah, unfortunately, you do have this lawn around here, but uh, it's actually a pretty small portion when you compare it to the rest of the site. But there's also, right, all these trees around here. Let's switch to a different color. And I'm not sure what all these are in particular, but I'd bet you they're valuable trees in terms of food or fiber, building material, but really they're just beautiful. But the main thing that draws my eye in this context is this big, long terrace, right? And so a terrace, say you have a hillside that's going down, you want to try and grow stuff on that. Well, you're going to have a pretty tough time. So what is done in these situations is that you make a terrace, right? So instead of it going down, then you have that big flat area. And that's what this is. And this is so even and precise. It's awesome. I see this nice pathway going down through here for easy access. And then all these beds and rows are the same, which makes it really good for management's sake, right? We'll get more into that, but I mean, this is just such a brilliant design. So, we have this terrace here, but then we also have all these vineyards over here. And this is a southern facing slope. So the design maximizes all that solar capture and can grow some varieties that you might not have otherwise in the climate. Right? And then we have all these trees, and these are spaced out pretty nicely. There's some over here too. Obviously, these aren't all originals. A lot of them are, but they've done a pretty good job at maintaining all that. And if you look really closely, it's going to be kind of hard to see, especially if I draw over it. But that line right here, That's where they have the herbs and stuff of a smaller portion, smaller quantity. And another thing that's going to be kind of hard to see in this image, but one of my favorite things is that right there. It's just like a little covered garden house, where you can go to feel completely immersed within the world around you, and you know, sure, some beautiful writing was done in that place. And here's another shot of it. How'd that work, by the way? Leave me a comment. Um, yeah, so if we're looking at this, I'm not going to pull out the drawing thing quite yet. Actually, no, we might as well, right? When live streaming, you might as well have some fun. Uh, Even if I'm a little clunky right now, I hope you trust that I will get better at this as time goes on. So, so this is a main thing that I want to be talking about in my channel is taking and analyzing all of these historic designs and whatnot, like and existing conditions. Um, oh, forgive me, I made a little should have been obvious mistake. Um, Set up some hotkeys for all this. Okay, so this is such a beautiful design in my mind. Again, we have all these parallel beds going down through here. That's that little house that I mentioned. We have our vineyards and our orchards all going through here, right? In the house, oh my goodness, such a beautiful place. You have like the main area through here. Maybe I'll just switch that color to red, right? You have this main area in here. But then you also have these awesome halls that stretch all the way down. Have the nice walking paths going around. Oh, I didn't notice this before, but I am seeing a ditch over here on the backside, which I'm sure was used for some sort of water distribution, right? And actually, if you look closely, you can see a little pond there. But actually, yeah, look at this. So you can't quite see it in frame, but it looks like right here, there's a shallow little ditch, which could be looping all the way around, right? So yeah, genius design. Love it on top of a hill. Yeah, so let's keep moving though. And here's some close shots. You see that garden that I mentioned right here with those vineyards. Just a beautiful place. Jefferson is a really influential public figure, and he's far from perfect, like any human, but he made this effort, definitely with a lot of help. There was actually, unfortunately, a lot of slave labor that went into making this terrace, but even still, the resources that were available, he devoted into making a piece of land the best that he could, right? And being in touch with nature and that productive spirit. Right? So Jefferson also, he respected artisans, but did warn a little bit about some specialization, but did in the same time value that artisans saw themselves and their skills essential to society, right? And doing so in a virtuous manner. Now, this is where things are going to get a little out of order. I didn't spend enough time with this PowerPoint because I thought this was going to come a little bit later, but we'll roll with it. So this is Luther Burbank, right? And Luther Burbank is one of my favorite plant breeders of all time. Um, that's him with the Shasta daisy. But he was known for being able to come up with varieties and species of plants that were thought to be impossible. Um, I mean, he had these crazy techniques where he would like talk with his plants and um, he'll tell them what he wanted, stuff that the scientific community, especially at the time, didn't understand. His notes were terrible. Um, and so there's just a big element of mystery around him that is part of the allure to me, at least. But I mean, he was able to come up with all this crazy stuff, like the thornless cactus, white blackberries or raspberries. He's represented in a lot of art. This is Frida Kahlo of Luther Burbank. Really interesting image. Um, and before, oh, I guess you got a sneak preview here. All right. So with Burbank, he was so connected with nature, it was unbelievable. Right. And he had this respect and reverence for what was around him and his observations. And it was through that and other people, through history, that brings about this idea of the Garden of Eden, right? This idea that at some point nature was so abundant that everything existed in some sort of harmony. But as we're told in Genesis, and the oldest stories in the world from many cultures, actually, we got kicked out of the garden, right? And it's talked about this tree of life, tree of knowledge. Well, the tree of life is the spark of life. The tree of knowledge, it's earthly, and it gave us this false assumption that we could control life, right? And that's where some of these infinite looping cycles come into play. And it makes us doomed to never be able to ascend to a higher state. And so this is one of the main focuses for my channel, is to try and show you how you can create Eden in the world around you. But it doesn't happen by luck, by happenstance. It takes conscious intention. And it takes understanding what all these organisms would do on their own in a natural condition and putting those pieces back into place, because humans have caused huge amounts of degradation all over the world. And we'll get into that in some later videos. But we're also capable of tremendous regeneration. The thing is, our ecosystems have been thrown so out of whack that oftentimes it's hard to let nature get there on its own. It takes some assistance. And getting back to some yeomans, well, jumping ahead of myself, the goats here, think about what they're doing in nature. They like to climb and they like to eat brushy stuff. So this is in an olive orchard, and this goat here, they're cleaning off all these interior leaves and reducing fire hazards, which is a big thing that we can have some videos later on about wildfires and their causes. And it's essentially you people get this idea that we can stop all fires, Smokey the Bear, but in actuality, uh, it's much more complex than that. Um, and fire is needed, and disturbance is needed, and we'll leave it there for now. Now, speaking of yeoman, P.A. Yeoman, yes, that was his name, and I appreciate one of my biggest influences in terms of landscape designers. He created these amazing low cost solutions to restoring landscapes, right? And he wrote several books, one of them being Water for Every Farm. And in those, he lays out these varying approaches. But, if we look at, let's zoom in here. If you look at this irrigation canal, right? So imagine you have your hillside, and that's where water is going to flow. So similar to a terrace, what these things are here is they're little structures. So if that was your hillside, right, they're little structures that slow the water down, and then you can start to distribute it, right? And so if we're looking at this photo here, you know, there are these floodgates, and that's all it is. Literally, it could be as simple as a board. Oh, that's just going right under the water. And so, so this here would be like a, you know, a side view of it. So let's look at a front view of what this might look like, right? So say that's the top of your berm. It's still going slightly downhill, right? So it's still going slightly downhill. But with these ditches here, so let's put that ditch there, you can put in a series of gates. And so as the water's flowing, and then it overflows, well, it's not going to overflow actually, if you set up your gate and your ditch right, because it's going to be lower along this edge, and then it's going to spread all the water out down the hill, right? And so you can repeat this process, and you know, you can create these amazing irrigation systems with tools that are available really all around the world. And that to me is pretty darn amazing. All right. So and here you can see one of those landscapes. Let's do a new snip here, because this is a really cool property. And gosh, I wish I remembered the name off the top of my head. I should have sourced it. I'll be sure to do that later on in some different videos. Okay, so now keyline design. Actually, let me see here. Other slides lined up that'll explain it. Well, here's another image. Okay, we got our scale of permanence. Now we'll go back to this image, and I'll explain it here. So if you imagine you have some contours going around your landscape, right? Actually, I have some images of a contour line, but so I can see here that this is kind of the general natural shape of the land, something like that. You know, kind of coming around, you know. And so before any of the earthworks and features, before there would have been these big concentrations of water in like these valleys. So you can still see some of those outlets going down, right? There's one there, there's one there. You know, this one goes up higher, right? And that's wasteful, right? Because water's flowing and it's leaving your system, and yet we battle droughts all over the world. Well, what YEOMAN did here is he put in these different like earthworks and features, right? So you put in a dam here and here. Well, then all of a sudden, when that water starts to come down, it gets backed up, right? And then you put in these series of contour features with these little shallow ditches, right? And so you can see, instead of flowing down in the valley, the water's allowed to spread out and around, and you can see this water radiating down the side of the hill, which normally would be super dry, right? And he had this interesting storage thing up top to capture all the water. Now, just to clean this up a little bit so we can see a little bit better of what's here, you know, we have our rows of trees that are spaced in a pattern that allows for efficient management, right? So you still have your alley crops, but you do have your buffer strips of trees. I should change the color. Buffer strips of trees going around. Now, a really big thing with PA Yeoman that's such a valuable thing to understand, and is one of the reasons that he is known all around the world, and it's a huge influence for people, is here's another place in Mexico. I believe Richard Perkins of Ridgedale Permaculture helped out with this one. So anyway, he had this idea of the scale of permanence, right? And so on this axis, we have things that are more difficult to change. And then on this axis, we have things that are more permanent, increasing as you go right. You know, so climate, while there's many conversations about climate change, changing on the individual level, you can do some things about microclimate and stuff. But yeah, on an individual level, there's not a ton that you can do. It requires things beyond your means, right? So relatively permanent and difficult to change. Now with land shape, right, we can move some soil around, but we are bounded by that, right? I mean, there's some amazing giant projects, you know, like people building artificial islands and all that stuff, changing the shape of the land. But once you do it, it's relatively permanent, right? Yeah, so we're capable of it, but it just means that we need to use that as a frame of reference more importantly than, say, where are you going to put your building, right? Because the shape of your land should be the dictator of future decisions, not in a vacuum, but because it's more permanent, you have to take those decisions very seriously. And then water and access, they're kind of related, right? I mean, water, you can't really change rainfall patterns, but you can change how the water is stored in the soil and how it goes around the site. Again, at scale, this is maybe a topic for later on. At scale, we can reverse deserts and change rainfall patterns, but you know, on your relatively small farm, unless you're millions of acres, even maybe thousands of acres, you can't do a whole lot about rainfall. But we can design our systems so that it gets water around a farm better. And access and roads are a good way to do that. So I'll definitely, sometime in the future, do a deep dive in keyline design. And this is a big focus of the channel, really. I want to help you think through this sort of approach with some modifications for your piece of land. So comment, maybe send me a Google Maps, and then I can pull it up, and then we can go through this exercise, and I'll show you how I would go about designing a piece of land. And maybe in the future we'll do some walkthroughs of sites that I've worked with and designed, and kind of my thought process with it all. Now, yeah, then trees come after roads and structures, and then you have your structures, and then fencing, and your soil. Soil is a precious resource, and we should value it. But if you have the right techniques, you can build soil pretty quick with not a ton of effort. So this is a brilliant heuristics model for decision making that I really recommend y'all do some more exploration with, and I'm here to help. Now, a lot of these concepts are not new. We can look at ancient cultures all over the world, and they had these things figured out. Some of my favorites are in South America, and they just had some amazing systems. They had these floating gardens, which I think are genius. Say you live on this is running a little low on time, huh? So we'll be quick. Sorry, poor planning. Guess I'm having fun. Maybe I should keep doing this. So we'll hold off on drawing. But the idea is that they made their own islands in the shallow edges of a lake, right? And they planted perennials on the sides. And this means that their crops never needed to be irrigated because the capillary action pulled the water up, right? So because I got to go meet a student. I'm a farm manager at Grand Valley, by the way. Uh, so I have to run here in the next short while. So I'm just going to fly through some images of things that I'm interested in and that we'll explore as time goes on with this channel. All right, so here are some of those floating gardens. The Fertile Crescent. You know, my family's from Syria, so I've paid a lot of attention to this area where the Garden of Eden used to be. Cradle of civilization, poor agriculture practices kind of ruined it. But you know, there's still some remnants around, like the Marsh people. Oh, what do you see here? This is a thing that I'm really into is pattern recognition. So this is you know, you just had some context. The south of Spain. You know, I see some mountains in the foreground, and you know, the roads and whatever. But what about that? What's that big white thing? You keep zooming in. I mean, that's about 25 miles long, and that's all greenhouses, right? And you know, if you were to look back at the landscape, it's really dry. But if you go to say a different region, say in the coastal mountains of Syria, where some of the really ancient structures are in, I mean, it's still green and lush, but similar climate conditions. It's just all about the management style. Some amazing water technology that people have done over the day. These are big water irrigation wheels. My great uncle was telling me about one that his father had in Beirut. That's another story. You know, we go to the Netherlands. You know, a lot of their country is below sea level, but they've figured out a really ingenious distribution and mitigation strategy for all of it. And some of it's pretty intense. Right? You can clearly see the water below sea level, or the house below the water level there, and yet they're okay. And because they have this constrained land and really fertile soil, they've really invested in high tech greenhouse technology. You know, tall ceilings here. You know, there's just really big areas of them. Some shots. You know, and this stuff isn't exactly new. They've been doing it for a while. It's a house that's inspired by a greenhouse that I'm into. We'll do some videos later on architecture and buildings. That's another thing I have some background and design experience in. Some more inspiration, farmers of 40 centuries. You know, in East Asia, some of these farms have been around for just as old as the ones in Mesopotamia, and yet they're still lush and fertile. And the Middle East is turned into a desert. And this book outlines some of their philosophies behind it. But it's all about working with nature and managing resources. You know, and there's some really cool examples of modern day farmers who are taking some of these old ideas and applying them into different contexts. Like this is J.M. Fortier, who wrote the book The Market Gardener. This is a new farm that is started up, and you can see all that same alley cropping that you saw a couple slides back with perennial beds, and just beautiful farm. We'll do another exploration of it. You know, ponds around, and beautiful family. Just love to see that. We got Ben Hartman, who wrote The Lean Farm, using technology to make things more easy and accessible. You know, so easy that you can spend some time with your kids doing it. So that's Ben's old farm. So lean farming, we'll do another video on that in, sometime. It's all about how can you do less. Like we always talk about what can we do. Well, Fukuoka and others in Japan, especially Toyota, it's like, what can you not do? How can you streamline things? And Fukuoka didn't preach lean farming per se. It's kind of a renaissance in the past few years. But that whole lean system is really big over in Japan. Curtis Stone, the urban farmer, great model, making 100 grand on quarter acre in the city, you know, so there's no excuses. Now you can be here where the RLC used to be, you know, all this irrigation stuff. I wish I had another little while to get into this. Sepp Holzer, amazing farmers at Kramerhof. Greg Whitstock, the pond guy. I think this is Nature's Recreations out in Missouri, I want to say. Yeah, I'm really into ponds and aquatics and all of that. You can get some amazing stuff. And so I'm from Michigan, and I love the beaches. And so I mentioned, I was trying to solve problems related with water. Well, this water milfoil here was something I spent some time at a research institute out in Muskegon studying. And since I'm low on time, we'll leave it at people try and treat them with herbicides and it doesn't work and they get around it. I suspect through some epigenetic phenomena. Um, but it really made me realize if we just keep treating the symptom, the same thing, it's just going to keep coming back. So we got to get to the source. Stuff in epigenetics, multi-trophic aquaculture. I love Nicholas Tesla. I grew up with pigeons. My dad raised a bunch of pigeons in our backyard, so I spent a lot of time cooling with the pigeons. Um, and Nicholas Tesla, genius of our day, but right before our time, ahead of our time. He loved pigeons, particularly that one. Master of earthly forces. We'll do that. So I want to grow opportunities, and I want to help get us into this golden age as little as I can do. But basically this time where there's peace and harmony, and so this might be talking about the time of like the Garden of Eden. This quote here. Where there's peace and prosperity, and people didn't need rules because we were honest and virtuous. Might be a pipe dream, but so we'll leave it there. So thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about some of this stuff, and if there's anything that you want me to make some videos about. So you get a little taste here, but we'll make some more as time goes on. So thanks for going with me, and let's keep it up.